There was the ringer, the drains, the dead, the ghosts of the dead, watching and judging and condemning, as I vomited into the double sink where my mother and I had washed Alvin's clothes, and there were the alley cats who would disappear into the cellar when the outside back door was left ajar and then yowl from wherever in the dark they were crouched, and there was the agonized cough of our downstairs neighbor, Mr. Wishnow, a cough that sounded from the cellar as though he were being ripped apart by the teeth of a two-man saw. Like my father, Mr. Wishnow was an insurance agent with the Metropolitan, but for over a year he had been on disability pay, too ill with cancer of the mouth and the throat to do anything but stay at home and listen to the daytime radio serials when he wasn't asleep or uncontrollably coughing. With the blessing of the Home Office, his wife had taken over for him, the first female insurance agent in the history of the Newark district, and now kept the same long hours as my father, who generally had to go back out after dinner to make his collections and canvass for prospective customers, most every Saturday or Sunday, weekends being the only time when he could hope to find a breadwinner at home to listen to his spiel. Before my mother had herself begun to work as a sales lady at Hans, she would stop downstairs a couple of times a day to see how Mr. Wishnow was doing, and now, when Mrs. Wishnow called to say she couldn't be home in time to cook a proper dinner, my mother would prepare a little more of whatever we were eating, and Sandy and I, before we were allowed to sit down to our meal, each carried a warm plateful of food to the first floor on a tray, one for Mr. Wishnow and one for Selden, the Wishnow's only child. Selden would open the door for us, and we would maneuver our trays through the foyer and into the kitchen, absorbed in trying not to spill anything as we set them on the table, where Mr. Wishnow was already waiting, a paper napkin tucked into the top of his pajamas, but looking in no way able to feed himself, however desperately in need of nutrition. "You boys all right?" he would ask us, as the shredded rag of a voice that was left to him. "How about a joke for me, Philly? I could use a good joke." He allowed, but without bitterness, without sadness, merely demonstrating the soft, defensive joviality of someone still hanging on for no seeming reason. Selden must have told his father that I could make the kids laugh at school, and so I would teasingly be asked to tell a joke, when just by his proximity he'd have obliterated my capacity to speak. The best I could do was try to look at somebody whom I knew to be dying, and worse, resigned to dying, without allowing my eyes to see in his the gruesome evidence of the bodily misery he was being made to pass through on the way to a spectral life in our cellar with the other dead. Sometimes, when Mr. Wishnow's supply of medicine had to be refilled at the drugstore, Selden would hurry up the stairs and ask if I wanted to go with him. And because that I had learned from my parents that Selden's father was doomed, because Selden himself acted as if he knew nothing about it, there was no way I could think of to refuse him, even though I'd never liked being with anyone so nakedly eager to be befriended. Selden was a child, transparently under the sway of his loneliness, undeservedly rich with sorrow, and working much too hard to achieve the permanent smile, one of those skinny, pallid, gentle-faced boys who embarrass everyone by throwing a ball like a girl, but also the smartest kid in our class, and the school-wide whiz at arithmetic. Oddly, there was nobody in gym class better than Selden at scrambling up and down the ropes that dangled from the gymnasium's high ceiling, his aerial nimbleness integrally related, according to one of our teachers, to his unchallengeable adroitness with numbers. He was already a little champ at chess, which his father had taught him, and so whenever I accompanied him to the drugstore, I knew there was no way to prevent my winding up later at the chessboard in his family's darkened living room. Dark to save electricity, and dark because the drapes were now drawn all the time to keep the neighborhood morbidly curious from peering in at Selden's step-by-step descent into fatherlessness. Undeterred by my stern resistance, Solidarity Selden, he'd been nicknamed by Earl Axman, whose mother's overnight mental collapse had been a startling parental catastrophe of another order, would try to teach me for the millionth time how to move the pieces and play the game, while behind the back bedroom door his father coughed so frequently and with so much force that there seemed to be not one father but 4, 5, 6 fathers in there coughing themselves to death. And we will pause there.